All right, thank you for joining us. My name is Sean Wheeler, and I'm with PureHypnosis.com. And I'm here today with a special guest, my friend Wesley Anderson with Trance-Formations.com. He's a hypnotist that's been in the Atlanta area, has been practicing for over 20 years now. I'm just a rookie. I've only been doing this for 6+ years. What we're going to do first is we want to talk about some of the misconceptions about hypnosis that so many people out there have, because frankly, most of the information people get about hypnosis comes from movies and crazy TV shows that they've seen. And first of all, let me ask you, Wesley, what is the number one thing, or what are the top couple of things that you get from people as far as fears or misconceptions that hold them back from trying this out?
Probably the most common question I get is, are you going to make me bark like a dog? And I always say, well, only if you pay me to, but that seems kind of silly.
Right, because the fact is that what?
Well, I'm not in the business of doing stage shows and humiliating people. My job is to help them be more powerful, more capable in themselves.
Right. And so the truth is that people don't completely lose control and do exactly what the hypnotist tells them to do when they're hypnotized.
Oh, if only they would. I'd have such an easier time of it.
I would too. I wouldn't be sitting around making podcasts. I'd be ruling the world and dominating it. The
both of us, yeah.
The both of us together, right? We would just hypnotize everyone and bend them to our will. The truth is that what happens in hypnosis is more about cooperation, but we're going to get to that a little bit later. Another thing that people sometimes have a worry about is that they're going to go to sleep, right? That they're going to fall asleep and have complete amnesia for everything that took place.
Well, sometimes people will have amnesia for what took place, and they'll think they were asleep. However, they were responding to the suggestions I gave them, so I knew they were in hypnosis.
How do you know that they were responding? What is it that you look for?
Well, if I ask them to come back, they do. They open their eyes. Open your eyes right now. Lift your hand. Okay, they lift their hand.
Right, so have you ever lost anyone who actually went to sleep?
Sure.
Yeah, I have too. And
yeah.
So how do you know when that happens? What's the difference?
Well, I think the difference is that they just get, they become less responsive.
Right.
So it takes a little while. It takes a little something to wake them up. It's obviously they've zoned off someplace.
Yeah, you have to tap them on the wrist, shake
right.
them a little bit, and
right.
yeah, and so they actually, or they start snoring. You ever had one of those?
Yes, yeah. I've had people snore in hypnosis too. I mean, they weren't really asleep, but they'd be snoring anyway because they
right.
were so relaxed.
Well, there's definitely a difference between going to sleep and being in a deep state of trance.
Absolutely.
And that when someone does come back and open their eyes when instructed to do so, then that generally means that they've been hypnotized and that they haven't fallen off the map
right.
into a deep sleep.
Right.
Okay. So typically, a person is not going to completely lose awareness, awaken at the end of the trance, and have no memory for what took place.
That's correct. And there have been times when people have had those kinds of experiences of trance, and there's even ways to set it up so they don't remember what it was that we were talking to them about.
Right.
And the value of that is basically that there's information we want their unconscious mind to process without the conscious mind trying to mull it over and analyze it and getting in the way, like
right.
a friendly puppy.
Yeah, I mean, some things are best left forgotten.
Yes.
Right? So while amnesia is not a prerequisite, it's something that can happen.
Yes.
Okay. But more often than not, I think my experience as a hypnotist has been, and even as someone who was hypnotized by you, is that you tend to remember most of what happened.
People know what's going on around them. They're aware of their environment. They know what's been said to them. They can decide whether they want to go along with it or not.
Right.
So, they actually are perfectly capable of responding whether they're hypnotized or not.
Right. So the truth is that for someone who's hesitant to be hypnotized because they fear that they're going to lose control and go to sleep and wake up at the end and not know what happened, if they really want to be aware, then they can be.
They certainly can.
Right. Okay. Oh, sometimes I get this thing. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't want to get hypnotized because once I get there, I don't know what I might say.
Chances are they're not going to say much of anything. Milton Erickson used to say that he liked hypnotized people because they were so polite, by which he meant that he could do all the talking.
Right. You don't have to listen to them.
Right. People in hypnosis are not typically volunteering much by way of speech. They'll answer questions. And, of course, one of the things you'll notice is that when you ask a question, it'll take them a little longer than usual to answer it.
Right.
Because they're so relaxed, and it takes a little while for the thought to rumble through.
Yeah, everything slows down a little bit.
It
right?
does.
Yeah. And typically, I think that one of the things that people aren't aware of as much is when you go to a hypnosis session, a lot of that time is spent in what would look like normal conscious conversation.
Yes.
Right.
A Martian anthropologist reporting back on a hypnosis session would say two people sat down and talked. At one point, one of them talked a lot more than the other one.
Right. And at one point, one of the people may have closed their eyes. Right. But there is a lot of exchange of information that takes place even before you might induce a formal trance.
Huge amounts of information. People don't know it, but they demonstrate the problem when they talk about it, and they give us the solution to their problems when they describe it in the first place.
Right.
If we know how to pay attention.
If you're paying attention to it,
right,
then we as hypnotists will pick up on that, and then that will help us to know how to direct them when we do give suggestions or when we do induce trance.
Sure. You want an example?
Sure.
I had a client who had been housebound for about 3 years because every time she heard music, she would cry uncontrollably. So if she couldn't go to the mall, there might be music. Her husband had to turn the sound on the TV off and use the SAP subtitles because there might be background music in the TV shows. And so she said to me when she first called me up that she described the problem. She says, I hear music, I see this image of the house where I used to live, and I start crying uncontrollably. Well, the image of the house where she used to live was the solution to the problem. So I simply had her put that behind a black curtain and then raise the curtain up as the house went off into the distance. And 5 or 6 times it's automatic. So then I sang to her, and she looks all startled and not quite sure what to do. And I go, "What's going on?" She says, "I didn't cry."
Right.
And then she told her husband to pay me more than my price.
Which is always a good thing to hear, unless you're the husband, of course.
He was happy for us. Like he'd been suffering for 3 years with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet it was a nice relief for him. So I guess the thing is that when a person comes in for a session, they don't just sit down and immediately drop off into trance, wake up at the end and have no memory of what happened. That there's conversation that takes place, information gathering, and then there might be some experiences that they lose memory for, or that they have amnesia for. But generally speaking, if so, it's by choice through a cooperative process, and there's benefit to forgetting about that thing.
Sure.
Right. Now, one other thing that's kind of silly these days, because you'd think that information would spread a little bit better than it has, but some people might even have a fear that they're going to get stuck in a trance. So tell me about what do you think about that?
I wish I could get stuck in trance. It feels so good. The mind functions so clearly. There's only 3 options for somebody who's in hypnosis. One of which is they'll wake up spontaneously. The other one is they'll wake up when they're asked to. The third one is they'll go into physiological sleep and then they'll wake up.
Yeah, in the same way that they would from a nap.
Yeah.
Right.
Being in hypnosis is the same as halfway awake, halfway asleep.
Right. Well, the thing I say, when I do the occasional comedy show, I'll say, the worst thing that can happen to you is that in a few days you'll wake up in my basement surrounded by other people who couldn't be hypnotized or who couldn't wake up.
We stack them like cordwood, right?
We stack them, right? Yeah. So I guess because it's a natural state, which is something that we have to continue to repeat because people have a hard time understanding that, because a lot of times they'll say, what if I can't be hypnotized, right? And, I would say probably 50% of the people that call me and are interested in hypnosis have doubts about whether or not they can be hypnotized because they believe themselves to be strong-willed, or they believe themselves to be too high-strung or too anxious or nervous.
Strong-willed people are some of the best people for hypnosis. And anybody who can understand a sentence can be hypnotized. Mm-hmm. Hypnosis is halfway between being awake and being asleep. It's the same mindset that somebody who's so absorbed in watching the TV that they need to call his name 3 times before they catch his attention.
Right.
That's a hypnotic state. Missing the exit on the expressway because your mind was somewhere else. That's a hypnotic state. These are all normal mind states for people. What happens in hypnosis is that the hypnotist sets up a feedback loop and rapport with the other person, so they're actually working together rather than one person. It's not one person imposing on the other. The two are working together in the trance state. And my job is to guide people into states of consciousness and with suggestions and offer ideas that are acceptable to their particular personality so that they can accomplish something extraordinary for them.
And that's based on knowing them as well as you can get to know them in a short period of time in a session, asking the right questions, understanding their motivations, so that when we do deliver the suggestions to you, it fits.
And we're paying attention to the nonverbal communications as well.
What we've talked about here so far is a lot of misconceptions about hypnosis and what it isn't. What we're going to do in the next part of this podcast, in a separate installment, is we're going to talk about what hypnosis is and how you can realize, or how you can, if you've been hypnotized, how to recognize it. Thank you for joining us on this first installment. Thanks again, Wesley.
Glad to be here.
All right, and we'll see you soon.